You've seen them in boardrooms, social circles, even in your own family. They never seem rattled, never caught off guard, never emotionally hijacked by the chaos swirling around them, while others crumble under pressure, lose their composure, or break down when challenged. These individuals remain untouchable, not because they're heartless, not because they don't feel, but because they've mastered something most people never even realize exists. Emotional armor. Niccolo Machiavelli didn't just write about political strategy. He decoded the invisible shield that separates those who get manipulated from those who do the manipulating. He understood that in every interaction, every relationship, every moment of conflict, there's an emotional chess game being played, and most people don't even know they're on the board. They think emotions just happen to them. Random, uncontrollable, something that overwhelms them when life gets intense. But Machiavelli saw the truth. Emotions aren't random. They're weapons. And the person who learns to control them, to weaponize them, to remain untouchable when others are bleeding emotionally, gains access to a level of power most people can't even comprehend. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming strategic. Because while everyone else is reacting, explaining, defending their feelings, the Machiavellian mind is calculating, observing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike not with cruelty, but with precision so surgical that others don't even realize they've been outmaneuvered until it's already over. Today, we're going to dissect the psychological architecture behind this invisible armor, the mental frameworks that allow certain individuals to walk through emotional warfare without a scratch, the tactical mindset that transforms vulnerability into strength, chaos into opportunity, and other people's emotional instability into your strategic advantage. Because here's what most people don't understand about emotional manipulation. It's not about being louder, more aggressive, or more dramatic. The real masters operate in silence. They create emotional responses in others while remaining completely detached themselves. They understand that the person who loses control first loses everything, and they've trained themselves never to be that person. Research reveals something chilling about individuals with high Machiavellian traits. They don't just resist emotional manipulation, they're immune to it. Not because they can't feel, but because they've developed what psychologists call emotional compartmentalization. They can observe their own emotions like a scientist studying data. They feel the anger, the hurt, the frustration, but they don't let those feelings drive their decisions. This creates a devastating advantage, while others are drowning in their emotional reactions, making decisions based on how they feel in the moment. The Machiavellian mind remains calculating. They watch people expose their weaknesses through emotional outbursts. They catalog vulnerabilities. They note who can be triggered, how and when, and they file this information away for future use. But this isn't sociopathy. This isn't about lacking empathy entirely. Modern psychological research shows that Machiavellian individuals often understand emotions better than most people. They can read facial expressions, detect lies, identify insecurities with frightening accuracy. The difference is, they don't let this emotional intelligence make them vulnerable. They use it as intelligence gathering. Think about the most manipulative person you've ever encountered. What made them so effective? It wasn't that they were obviously cruel or aggressive. It was their ability to remain calm while everyone else was losing their minds. They seemed to know exactly what buttons to push, exactly when to push them, and exactly how to maintain their composure while chaos erupted around them. That's emotional armor in action. Machiavelli observed this phenomenon centuries ago in the political courts of Renaissance Italy. He watched princes rise and fall based not on their military strength or their wealth, but on their ability to control the emotional landscape around them. The ones who survived weren't necessarily the most powerful. They were the most emotionally disciplined. He wrote about Cesare Borgia, a master of emotional theater. Borgia understood that people remember feelings more than facts. So when he needed to send a message, he didn't just issue a decree. He orchestrated an emotional experience so powerful, so psychologically impactful, that it would influence behavior for years to come. He created fear, satisfaction, and confusion simultaneously. And he did it all while remaining completely detached from the emotional chaos he had created. This is the blueprint. The person with true emotional armor doesn't just protect themselves from manipulation. They create it. They understand that emotions are contagious, that most people will mirror the emotional energy they encounter. So they become the emotional thermostat in every room they enter, not through force, but through strategic emotional control. While others are reacting to circumstances, they're creating circumstances. While others are responding to emotional triggers, they're setting emotional triggers. While others are trying to defend their emotional state, they're attacking other people's emotional stability with surgical precision. But here's where most people misunderstand this concept. They think emotional armor means becoming emotionally numb. They think it means cutting themselves off from feeling anything. That's not armor. That's emotional suicide. True emotional armor allows you to feel everything while being controlled by nothing. The Machiavellian mind experiences emotions fully. They feel the sting of insults, the rush of anger, the pain of betrayal. But they've developed an internal firewall that prevents these emotions from compromising their strategic thinking. They can feel hurt while planning their response. They can experience rage while maintaining perfect composure. They can be devastated internally while projecting strength externally. This creates an almost supernatural ability to outlast emotional attacks. When someone tries to provoke them, tries to make them react, tries to break their composure, they absorb the attack like armor absorbs a blow. The impact is felt, but the damage is prevented. And while their attacker is expecting an emotional response, they're met with something far more unsettling. Silence, calculation, strategic patience. Most people break under this kind of pressure because they've never trained their emotional discipline. They've spent their entire lives reacting instead of responding. They've let their feelings drive their decisions instead of using their feelings as information. They've confused emotional expression with emotional intelligence. But the individual with Machiavellian emotional armor has learned to separate feeling from action. They understand that emotions are temporary, but the consequences of emotional decisions are permanent. So they've developed the ability to pause between stimulus and response, to feel the emotion, process its information, and then choose their action based on strategy rather than impulse. This isn't just theoretical psychology. This is practical power. In negotiations, while others are getting frustrated, angry, or desperate, the emotionally armored individual remains focused on the outcome. They use other people's emotional instability as leverage. They make better deals because they're not compromised by their feelings. In relationships, while others are getting triggered, defensive, or needy, they maintain their center. They don't chase validation. They don't react to emotional manipulation. They don't get pulled into drama. This makes them simultaneously more attractive and more difficult to control. In conflicts, while others are losing their temper, saying things they'll regret, or making decisions based on wounded pride, they remain strategically focused. They choose their battles. They time their responses. They turn other people's emotional chaos into their own strategic advantage. The research on this is fascinating and disturbing. Studies show that individuals with high Machiavellian traits are significantly less likely to be manipulated by emotional appeals. They don't fall for guilt trips. They don't respond to emotional blackmail. They don't get swept up in group emotional hysteria. Instead, they observe these emotional dynamics like a chess master observing the board. They see the moves before they're made. They understand the psychological patterns. They recognize when someone is trying to manipulate them emotionally, and instead of getting angry about it, they catalog it as useful information about that person's character and methods. This creates a compound advantage. Not only are they immune to most forms of emotional manipulation, but they're constantly gathering intelligence about how to manipulate others. They watch people's emotional triggers. They note what makes people angry, sad, desperate, or compliant. And they file this information away for future strategic use. But this intelligence gathering isn't passive observation. It's active psychological reconnaissance. They create situations that reveal character. They ask questions that expose vulnerabilities. They present scenarios that force people to show their true emotional responses, all while maintaining the facade of casual conversation or innocent curiosity. This is where emotional armor becomes truly dangerous, because once you understand someone's emotional blueprint, you can engineer their responses. You can predict their reactions. You can manipulate their decisions without them ever realizing what's happening. The workplace becomes a laboratory for this kind of psychological experimentation. While colleagues are focused on completing tasks, meeting deadlines, or climbing the corporate ladder through conventional means, the Machiavellian operator is mapping the emotional ecosystem. They identify who responds to praise, who crumbles under criticism, who can be guilt-tripped into working harder, who needs validation to function. They don't just participate in office politics. They orchestrate it. They create alliances not based on friendship, but on strategic value. They form relationships not out of genuine connection, but as emotional insurance policies. They help people not from kindness, but to create debt that can be collected later. And the most chilling part? They do all of this while appearing completely normal, friendly even, helpful, supportive, because they understand that the best manipulation doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like genuine care, authentic interest, natural charisma. Their emotional armor isn't visible from the outside. They don't walk around with obvious defenses. They don't appear cold or calculating. Instead, they project warmth when it serves their purpose, show vulnerability when it gains them advantage, display anger when it advances their position. Every emotional expression is calculated for maximum strategic impact. This creates a terrifying paradox. The more emotionally manipulative they become, the more emotionally intelligent they appear to others. People describe them as empathetic, understanding, emotionally mature. They seem to always know the right thing to say, the perfect response to any situation, the exact emotional tone needed for any interaction. But this isn't emotional intelligence in the traditional sense. It's emotional weaponization. They've learned to use empathy as a targeting system rather than a connection tool. They understand your emotions not to validate them, but to exploit them. They mirror your feelings not to create intimacy, but to lower your defenses. Research reveals something disturbing about this psychological profile. These individuals often score low on traditional emotional intelligence tests. They struggle with genuine emotional recognition and authentic empathy. Yet in situations where manipulation is possible, where there's something to gain, their emotional accuracy becomes laser precise. It's as if their emotional intelligence is conditional, activated only when there's strategic value, dormant when there's nothing to exploit. This selective emotional engagement allows them to conserve their psychological energy for moments when it can be converted into power, influence, or advantage. The historical examples are everywhere once you know what to look for. Political leaders who remain composed during scandals while their opponents self-destruct through emotional reactions. Business executives who maintain perfect calm during hostile takeovers while their rivals make desperate, emotion-driven decisions. Social influencers who never seem affected by criticism while their competitors crumble under public pressure. They've all mastered the same fundamental principle. Emotional control isn't about suppressing feelings. It's about weaponizing the gap between feeling and action. Most people experience emotion and immediately express it. They feel angry, they show anger, they feel hurt, they reveal pain, they feel insecure, they seek validation. But the emotionally armored individual creates space in that process. They feel the emotion, analyze its strategic value, and then choose how to express it based on what will serve their interests. Sometimes they amplify the emotion for effect. Sometimes they suppress it completely. Sometimes they redirect it toward a different target entirely. This creates an almost supernatural ability to control social dynamics. They can escalate tension when it benefits them, diffuse it when it doesn't. They can make people feel guilty without appearing to try, grateful without genuine generosity, dependent without obvious manipulation. They understand that most people are emotionally reactive rather than emotionally strategic. So they create emotional states in others while remaining emotionally neutral themselves. They become the calm center around which everyone else's emotional chaos orbits. The laboratory where this plays out most clearly is in intimate relationships. Here, emotional armor becomes both most powerful and most destructive. They can make partners feel incredibly special through calculated attention, then devastatingly worthless through strategic withdrawal. They create emotional addiction through intermittent reinforcement, giving just enough affection to maintain control while withholding enough to create constant need. Their partners describe feeling like they're on an emotional roller coaster, never knowing which version of their Machiavellian partner they'll encounter. The warm, attentive, caring version who makes them feel like the center of the universe, or the cold, distant, critical version who makes them question their own worth. But this isn't random mood swings. It's calculated emotional conditioning. They've learned that unpredictable emotional rewards create stronger psychological bonds than consistent ones. So they engineer emotional uncertainty as a control mechanism. They study their partner's emotional patterns like a scientist studies lab rats. They note what triggers insecurity, what creates gratitude, what generates fear of abandonment. Then they use this information to maintain psychological control without ever appearing overtly controlling. The partner never quite knows where they stand, never feels secure enough to make demands, never confident enough to set firm boundaries, never certain enough to leave. They're trapped in a psychological maze where every emotional exit leads back to dependency on their Machiavellian partner's approval. And the most insidious part? The Machiavellian partner appears to be the stable one in the relationship. They never lose their temper, never appear jealous, never seem emotionally needy. When conflicts arise, they remain calm while their partner becomes emotional, making the partner appear unstable by comparison. This is emotional armor at its most sophisticated, not just protection from manipulation, but active psychological control disguised as emotional maturity. They've turned their inability to form genuine emotional connections into a strategic advantage that allows them to dominate relationships without appearing to try. The ultimate mastery comes in recognizing when someone is deploying these tactics against you. Because once you understand the blueprint, once you can see the emotional armor for what it really is, you gain something even more powerful than the armor itself. You gain immunity. Watch for the patterns. The person who never seems genuinely surprised by your emotional reactions. Who always has the perfect response ready, as if they've been expecting your feelings before you even expressed them. Who makes you feel like you're overreacting while they remain perfectly composed. Who somehow always ends up in control of situations without appearing to have seized control. These aren't accidents. These are the fingerprints of emotional armor in action. The most dangerous practitioners don't reveal their armor directly. They make you discover it yourself, usually too late. You realize you've been sharing your deepest insecurities while learning nothing meaningful about them. You notice that every conversation somehow becomes about serving their interests, while feeling like natural dialogue. You recognize that your emotional responses have become predictable to them, while theirs remain mysterious to you. This is when you understand you're not dealing with someone who's emotionally mature. You're dealing with someone who's emotionally weaponized, and the only defense against emotional armor is developing your own. But here's where most people make a fatal mistake. They try to outmanipulate the manipulator. They attempt to build their own emotional armor through imitation, thinking they can beat the Machiavellian at their own game. This almost always fails because they're trying to copy the tactics without understanding the underlying psychology. True emotional armor isn't built through manipulation techniques. It's built through genuine emotional discipline, the ability to feel without being controlled by those feelings, to observe your own emotional reactions with the same detachment you'd observe someone else's, to choose your responses based on your values and goals rather than your immediate emotional impulses. The difference is crucial. The Machiavellian builds armor through emotional disconnection. They protect themselves by numbing their capacity for genuine feeling. But authentic emotional armor maintains full emotional capacity while developing complete emotional choice. You feel everything. You're moved by beauty, touched by kindness, angered by injustice, saddened by loss. But you're not controlled by these feelings. You experience them fully, extract their information, and then choose your actions based on wisdom rather than impulse. This creates something the Machiavellian can never truly possess: genuine strength. Because their armor is built on the foundation of emotional avoidance, it's actually a form of weakness disguised as power. They can't afford to feel deeply because deep feeling would compromise their strategic thinking. But when you develop authentic emotional armor, you become truly dangerous. Not because you can manipulate others, but because you can't be manipulated. Not because you're emotionally numb, but because you're emotionally sovereign. You own your responses. You choose your reactions. You decide what affects you and what doesn't. The Machiavellian fears this type of person above all others because their entire system of control depends on being able to predict and manipulate emotional responses. When they encounter someone who feels deeply but chooses wisely, who experiences emotions fully but isn't controlled by them, their tactics become useless. You can't guilt trip someone who understands that guilt is just information about their values, not a command to change their behavior. You can't anger someone who recognizes anger as energy that can be channeled strategically rather than expressed reactively. You can't manipulate someone who sees emotional manipulation attempts as valuable intelligence about your character rather than attacks on their worth. This is the ultimate evolution of emotional armor. Not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of choice. Not the inability to be moved, but the wisdom to choose what moves you. Not emotional numbness, but emotional sovereignty. And once you achieve this level of emotional discipline, something remarkable happens. You stop needing to protect yourself from manipulative people because they naturally avoid you. They instinctively recognize that their tactics won't work, that their emotional armor is inferior to your emotional authenticity. You become immune not through building walls, but through developing roots so deep that external emotional storms can't uproot you. You gain the ultimate form of power, the kind that doesn't need to dominate others because it's completely secure in itself. The choice is yours. You can develop the hollow armor of emotional disconnection, protecting yourself through numbness while sacrificing your capacity for genuine connection. Or you can forge the authentic armor of emotional mastery, maintaining full feeling while gaining complete choice. One path leads to control over others at the cost of connection with yourself. The other leads to sovereignty over yourself while maintaining the capacity for authentic relationship with others. Machiavelli showed us the blueprint for emotional armor, but he never showed us the price. Now you know both the power and the cost. The question isn't whether you can build emotional armor. It's what kind of person you want to become in the process. Because in the end, the strongest armor isn't the one that keeps feelings out. It's the one that lets everything in, but lets nothing control you. That's not just emotional armor. That's emotional freedom. And freedom, unlike control, can never be taken away.